Hello viewers, my name is Jamie McRae, and I'm here to give you a quick lesson on cables. I'm doing this for the University of Berklee's online course, Intro to Music Production, as taught by Loudon Stearn. It's a fantastic course, and I highly recommend it if you get the chance. Now, the first type of cable I'd like to introduce you today is the TS cable, also known as an instrument cable, or the 1/4 inch cable, or whatever. It's a very standard cable. You probably see them all the time, especially if you're a guitar player or a bass guitar player. This is a common cable for you. The thing to remember is that it has the tip, the sleeve, and this conductor ring. What this all means is that, as this one ring shows, there is a single type of conductor wire running through the length of the cable that transmits your signal from one end to the other. The sleeve, as shown here, runs along the length of the cable and protects it from noise. You see, these types of cables are highly susceptible to noise, and thus you want to use as short of a cable as possible to try to mitigate that somewhat. Now, the sleeve does indeed protect it from noise and wear and tear, but it can't fully, perfectly protect it, and some noise will get in, especially if you have a longer cable. Now, that brings us to a second type of cable, called the TRS cable, or the headphone cable, as some of you may know them. This one also has a 1/4 inch connection, but as you can see here, it has two rings. This means that there are two conductors running through the length of the cable that are both transmitting signal. This is more often used in headphones, and you'll see the two conductors transmitting signal on a headphone cable to try to bring you a stereo output. This also still has the sleeve, so it's still being protected. However, again, these are still very susceptible to noise, and you want to try to minimize how long the cable is, how many of these are using, etc. Now, however, there is another way that TRS cables like this are used, and that's in balanced configurations. Balanced configurations are a different type of signal where the wires are wound in just such a way that noise is cancelled. So essentially, balanced cables can be longer and more effectively utilized in a way that cancels out noise. Balanced configurations are much more often used, for example, on stage, where a lot of outer noise might affect the signal if not for a balanced or noise-resistant configuration. The next cable I'd like to talk to you about is an XLR cable. Unfortunately, I don't have one with me, so I'll have to make do with this picture. As you can see in the picture, the XLR cable has two ends. One end, the male end, which is the end you see on the right, has 3 prongs, and the female end is on the left, with 3 holes. Now, these types of cables are very useful because they're mostly used for microphones. They have locking features, as you see on the left with the little thing on top there. They can be locked together and held for more resistance. And they're also balanced cables, meaning that they're much less prone to interference. Balanced cables like these are the best cables to use for long distance and on stage. The important thing to note about these is that they're not used for stereo signal. They can really only bring you a mono signal, which is very important to keep in mind when doing this with a mix. Now, another type of cable I'd like to bring you to, that I'd like to call your attention to, is this cable right here. Funny, I have to unscrew this. This is the 1/8 inch cable. Now, you've seen a million of these around. I think almost everybody on the planet probably has one at this point. It is the standard headphone cable. Regardless of what MP3 player you have, regardless of what sort of headphone cord you have, this is the cable that it's probably using. As you can see, it's essentially just a miniature version of the TRS cable. It has 2 conductor prongs, so you know it's a 2 conductor prong throughout the cord, excuse me. It has the tip at the end, which is slightly different from the 1/4 inch, in that it's a little differently shaped and will more effectively fit inside of a smaller device such as an MP3 player. And it has the sleeve, so it functions essentially just like a TRS cable, less interference. You know, you still don't want to have it be too long, but it's meant for your MP3 player. Now, the other type of cable I'd like to call your attention to are the RCA cables. Again, unfortunately, I don't have one here, so you're going to have to look at this picture. These cables are everywhere. They're mostly used for devices, you know, video game consoles, old VHS players, DVD players, etc., etc. You're probably familiar with the classic red, white, and yellow cables, which is an RCA cable split into 3. They function very much like 1/4 inch cables. They have a 1/4 inch shield around them, as you can see, and they can transmit video and audio signal. Now, the important thing to remember about these cables is that when you're connecting them to your studio appliances, you have to be very careful about the +4, -10 line levels. These cables may not transmit at the optimal level for you, so you may have to make some adjustments with your gear to properly optimize the level of volume and loudness you're getting in the signal from those cables. The other thing I'd like to point your attention to is the direct box. Direct boxes, I have an interface here, which is very different from a direct box, but I can at least show you some of the different things that make one up. This interface is the Line UX1, by the way. I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for something very basic for beginner interfaces. But anyway, so a direct box as a device will allow you to connect various sorts of musical recording appliances to your computer. As you can see on my interface, I have this outlet for XLR cables. I have this input for instrument cables, TS cables, so I can plug my guitar in. And I have this output, which is for headphone cables. These will be the TRS cables, the dual conductor cables. On the back is a USB output. This is very important, as this is what connects it to my computer. And then several other outputs, such as monitors, analog outputs, and line inputs. Now, the direct box is a very, very vital device for you to have in your studio. It allows you to have all your devices communicate with your other devices. It allows you to make the chains you need to record things. And especially for a beginner, they're not terribly expensive. My Line UX1 as an interface only ran me about $100 or so. You can find a direct box for a similar amount if you look online. You don't need anything particularly fancy. You don't need any humongous amounts of ports as a beginner. You just want a direct box that will let you connect all your different cables, an XLR, a TS, a TRS, etc., to your computer and to your other devices. So just as a quick recap, this is the head of a TRS cable. Dual conducting sleeve. So the two conductors intertwine, they bring you a stereo signal, the sleeve helps reduce noise. You don't want super long TRS cables. The instrument cables, or TS cables, they only have one conductor and a sleeve. There's one conductor that runs along the length of the wire, and then the sleeve that protects it. Highly susceptible to noise, try to keep these cables as short as possible. And the XLR cables. These are a balanced configuration. They're great for long distance, the best cables that there are for long distance. You want to use those cables when you're working with a high distance rig. They're for microphones primarily, and they don't bring you any sort of stereo output. Happy cabling! And also remember, don't skimp on these. These break a lot. Buy the nicest cables you can get. Happy music recording.